It is day one of Parliament's winter recess, but it hasn't slowed down the news cycle in Canberra. Nothing does it? On The Voice, I mentioned this earlier, Anthony Albanese has rejected Peter Dutton's offer to delay or change the referendum on an Indigenous voice to Parliament. The opposition leader wants a referendum at least delayed, but is that a sensible move? Let's bring in Nationals leader David Littleproud. David, thank you so very much for your time. The PM wants to place legal limits now on the scope of the Indigenous voice to Parliament. Does that give you any confidence that this might be a slightly better idea than originally thought?
No, it doesn't. The Nationals took a principled position some 8 months ago because we've already had a representative body before. It was called ATSIC, and regional and remote Indigenous Australians and regional Australia still bears the scars of that, and we were repeating the mistakes of the past. But the Prime Minister, who controls Parliament, doesn't have the courage to put the legislation of the mechanics of this voice on the table of Parliament so that everyone can see. He's not prepared to bring the Australian people into his trust, so why should they trust him? But there is an opportunity for him to pause now, to show courage and to show leadership, to bring our country together. He's divided our country. You only have to look at the polls. And Peter Dutton has made the right call in asking him to pause and to make this about constitutional recognition. The Nationals would also support that. But when you conflate it with another layer of bureaucracy that'll divide our country, that'll be caught up in the courts, just doesn't make sense. And this is where the Prime Minister needs to show leadership, and leadership now.
Do you think he's panicking to an extent with these slight changes that he's looking to make?
Well, he's seeing where the polls are, and obviously the polls are showing that there's now a majority that don't want to support this, and it's unfortunately his making, and it's because he hasn't been prepared to put all the details out there for the Australian people to understand. Australians do want to have a unifying moment on this, but conflating it with a bureaucracy rather than a simple question about asking the Australian people to put in their founding document. Indigenous Australians were here first. We made some mistakes along the road, but we're better having been together, and we're better sticking together. Would have been a unifying moment for this country, and now he realises that he's divided our country instead of unifying it. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have to pick the pieces of this up in October if this goes down, and the Nationals intend to be mature and show leadership about continuing to work constructively if that was the question to be put forward at a future date.
Are you, though, genuinely willing to work constructively? Would you change your stance like you're asking the Prime Minister to do if he can make changes?
No, because the principle that we got to very early was this is a representative body, and if you look at the co-design report, the Karma Langton report, it will be a repeat. It will be another representative body of about 24 to 27 representatives across Australia. And the practical experience that we have is you'll have one representative that'll be covering hundreds of thousands of square kilometres, hundreds of different diverse Indigenous communities that have different challenges but different opportunities. And therefore what we are doing is we're going back to the past and sending people into Canberra. The bureaucrats will generalise the feedback, and we'll get another national programs. You actually need to devise programs locally with Indigenous elders at a local community level. And I saw that today here in Dubbo with Indigenous elders and leaders who are closing the gap. And we've got to remember we have closed the gap in some areas, and we do know where that gap isn't closed. We've got all the data, so now we have to get granular and get the bureaucracy out of Canberra and around campfires, around town halls, making the difference rather than having them in Canberra. And this is where we can change it, and we should have an ambitious goal to have closed a gap by a certain date, not enshrine it for perpetuity in our constitution.